when you do propaganda, what tends to happen, it tends to water down the essence of the art. You can see that now with the messaging in new art from Disney, for example, with Pixar's movies. A lot of them are bombing at the moment. They're bombing because the audience, they get this feeling that they're being preached at, talked down to. And I think this is the trap the church fell into. Once you take your eye off the ball, and art now becomes a function. If I do this, I get that. Almost transactional. Once you do that, then you fall into the propaganda game. Of course, when you do propaganda, you're not doing art anymore. You're doing messaging. And that's what we've been doing for who knows how long.
We have created this dichotomy, haven't we, where, it's either art in the secular world or art. And sadly, I think often today, Christian art, music, literature is a kind of a sad copy of what's being done better in the secular world. And it feels like that's not always been the case. If you go back a few centuries, the church and Christianity and Christendom produced the best art because it was building the cathedrals and funding the Michelangelos. Is that era just gone? Or is there a way of kind of fueling good art through Christian faith again?
Episode of Re-Enchanting, the podcast brought to you by Seen and Unseen. I am Belle Tindall.
And I'm Justin Brierley.
And we, as usual, are pondering our favourite theme, re-enchantment. We're wondering whether we're craving it, where we're searching for it, and whether one of those places is the Christian story.
And we've got a brilliant guest to help us dig into that today.
Yeah.
Yes.
He brings his own hype. That's what we like.
If I don't blow my own trumpet, who will?
Absolutely. Let's introduce you. Siku is an artist, author, theologian, and musician. A leading comic book artist. He's worked for 2000 AD as an artist on titles like Judge Dredd, as well as Marvel UK and elsewhere. He's the author also of the book The Manga Bible, and that's just been reissued recently, and it is a great read. I was really into manga when I was a kid as well, so I want to talk about that. But you're also the author of other books. Batman is Jesus, so we'll talk about that today.
Controversial title.
And overall, I thought it'd be fun, with your background in graphic design and artists, to talk about superheroes, because I just feel like we kind of have become quite obsessed in the last decade or so with superheroes for one reason or another.
Our oldest story, by the way, did you know that?
Our oldest story.
Superhero genre is the oldest genre there is in literature that we know.
There
the oldest literature features a superhero.
So
wow.
I want to. Well, shall we dig into that in a moment?
Let's.
And because I'd love to unpack that.
Okay.
But funnily enough, our first question is always on the book end and literature end. As you know, you've done your homework, Siku.
Yes, I did.
You watched Joshua Luke Smith in our last episode, in our last season, come in with his own stack of books, and you've done the same. I'm
Look at
so
that. That's
impressed.
a bigger stack than Joshua has as well.
But so you said you're not going to do a podcast without anyone bringing their book.
I did say that.
and then I think it was you who said, "How do we top that?"
Well, we just have.
That's how
There we
you
go.
top
Books.
I'm glad you heeded my warning.
For those only listening on audio, we've got a large stack of books here that Siku has brought in. Okay, this will probably take half the podcast just to tell us about these books you've brought in.
I'm so ready.
But tell us, what have you got here?
Well, I tend to read more than one book at a time. So what we have here is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This is the Gulag.
You're starting with a big hitter there. Wow.
You are right. Okay.
And as you can see where I've marked it, that's where I got so far.
We're creeping in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I stop just so I can carry on. Sometimes I'll have a project and I need to do just a little bit of research. And so I'm studying Son of Man by Samuel Whitefield.
Okay.
And that's where I'm at the moment. Great research here, by the way. He redefines what Son of Man means. I recommend this to any scholar, Bible teacher, pastor. I recommend that.
So this is like your theology book that you're currently into.
Okay.
Yes, so that is massive. He redefines it in the most... Personally, I think this is the best book on the subject of the Son of Man.
Wow.
And then we have political ponerology.
Wow.
These two actually go together. This is narcissism when it comes to church. By what's his name now? Chuck DeGraw. And I've never read this. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
But it's on my to-read list.
that's
But this is
really
what I'm
good.
reading first. By an Eastern European prisoner of war.
Wow.
He's a psychologist. They understand narcissism in power, in politics, and in leadership more than anybody else on the planet because of communism.
I don't think I've ever heard the phrase ponerology.
It comes
What does that
from the
mean?
Greek word ponero, which is evil.
Right.
So when Jesus says to the people, those of you fathers who are evil, but you give good gifts to your children, he uses the word, well, the writer uses the word ponero.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
So these are 4 heavy books. You like to challenge yourself, is what I'm sensing here,
What do
Siku.
you do to relax?
Yeah. Well, I look
read
at
the
evil
Gulag
and
Archipelago.
politics. Yeah.
Yes, that's my light reading of, of an evening.
But you're instantly my favourite type of person. Bring a stack of books with you wherever you go. And
I'm so happy to please.
Wow. So, I mean, but tell me, as a kid, you probably weren't reading Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Were you into comics?
I was big into comics, but I'm going to disappoint you a little bit. When I was 18, I read Escape from Reason.
Oh wow.
I didn't understand a single word, but I finished it.
Okay.
nice.
Fair enough.
Nicely
Fair
done.
enough.
And I remember when I went back to study theology, and I wrote a little paper on can't quite remember. It's an argument for God or something. My first year, lecturer called me in and said, I thought you were a graduate student writing all this. Where did you get all this from? And I said, I got it from Escape from Reason.
Right.
First time I read it, didn't understand it. A few years later, 10 years later, I went back to it and I understood it. But what did I read as a kid? I read the kind of stuff that most kids read. I remember as a kid, gosh, how old was I? 3, 4, 5 years old. My dad would pick me up from nursery school. And every day we get to the junction. And then there is a corner shop on the side to our right. And I'll tug at him, said, Daddy, comic book. I didn't, you see, the word please wasn't in my collection of words that you use when you want to try and massage someone a little bit. And he would oblige. Go into the corner store, corner shop, and then he'll buy me a comic book. It would be Batman, Spider-Man, Doctor Who, whatever. One day he said no, because we did this 5 days a week, every week, every month. And one day he just said no, and that's when I stopped tugging on my dad, comic. But I remember, and I still remember, this is probably my first memory, 3 years old, a basement flat in Chelsea, walking into the living room, and there's this black and white Doctor Who running. And I look at it, and I can see the Daleks. Scared me to death. And I thought, whatever that is, I want to do that when I grow up. That was when I wanted to be an artist. I was 3.
Wow.
And I knew I wanted to do science fiction or fantasy. I don't know what it means. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing in it, but I want to do it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you got the bug early.
I got the bug very early.
Really? And was there, I mean, this is probably like asking you to pick your favourite child, but growing up, was there one character, one story that you were particularly drawn to?
Yeah. It's the same angst that most boys have, but particularly for a geek like me or a nerd like me or a nerd like us, very awkward with girls. Like when a girl walks into a room, you start sweating, don't know what to say, all that kind of stuff. Everybody else has boyfriends or girlfriends, and it's like, oh, you just, very slow developer because you're always inside. Your whole world is inside, not outside. So you're a slow developer on the social level because everything's in there. And what was the question again?
Well, what was there a hero that you would relate to? And what was the one?
So what hero would that be? It has to be the hero that's just like me, Peter Parker.
I thought that might be your answer,
Peter Parker. I love Peter Parker because when I read his story, he was me.
Yeah.
Second hero that I loved was Luke Skywalker, because Luke Skywalker is just like me. So those are my heroes when I was a kid. Of course, when you grow up and you become the man, my daughter says you're not the man, but when you become the man, who's the man? The brooding dog genius, Batman. It's gonna be It's not Spider.
So you
not
kind of
Superman with his pants outside. It's gonna be Batman.
You went on a journey from Peter Parker to Bruce Wayne.
Wayne.
Yeah, I see. I've often wondered, like with superheroes, whether one of the reasons we're drawn to them is often because of that alter ego thing, like this kind of mild-mannered, specky journalist turns out to be, the superheroes. And maybe that we've all inside us got a kind of harbour a desire that we could be that person, that there's something inside us. I don't know. And maybe for the kind of introverted kid, that speaks to them very often.
Absolutely. For the introverted kid, I was one of those kids that would sit at the back of the class so I could draw. One of the reasons why I wasn't very good at school it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent. It was because I wasn't paying attention in class. So I sit at the back, I would draw, I would stare through the window and just gaze and imagine that I was, I don't know, Hulk or whatever. So I spent a lot of my time just daydreaming.
Yeah, and doodling.
And doodling, yes. Yeah, so that's why I was terrible. Look, the thing is, I knew I wanted to be an artist, so why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Just give me art. I don't care if it's music, dancing, writing, history, literature. Give me art. Of course, growing up in Nigeria, if you say you want to be an artist, they say, so you want to be a dropout. Literally, I'm not joking.
Oh, really? That's the assumption.
That's the next question. If you say, I want to be an artist, the next answer is, the retort is, so you want to be a dropout?
Wow.
So dad wanted me to be an accountant. Mom wanted me to be a doctor. So what did we do? We chose business and science subjects when you got to GCSE level. Well done.
Yeah. So
dropped art, by the way.
What, you dropped art?
I dropped art.
No way.
And then my art teacher said, I was a best student. Why did you drop art? I said, my dad told me not to do art. He said, take it up again. Don't tell him.
And did he?
Yes.
Wow.
He saved my life.
Wow.
Mr. Aina is his name, and I still remember him because he saved my life.
Wow. Well, I mean, when you say saved your life, is it because art was there, it needed to be expressed? It was like you had to have that outlet somehow?
It was like breathing.
Yeah.
It was like drinking. It was like eating.
Yeah.
I was doing it all the time, all day. It wasn't like I chose it. It chose me. It chose me when I was 3. And I knew that was what I was going to do. I know people who became lawyers, pressurized by family and culture to become accountants and doctors, and they left the profession to become artists. I know people like that.
I mean, I can understand your parents' concerns at one level,
Absolutely.
because it's hard to make a living in
Absolutely.
art. It's amazing when you hear people chasing that dream, but yeah, it's difficult sometimes to put food on the table. So how did you work that out? I mean, you went on to have a very successful career, actually,
Yes.
in graphic art and comic design and so on.
Of those of us who graduated, I'm probably one of a handful who earned a living by doing art.
Right.
So it is tough to do, and you have to be resilient to do it. So any artist who's earning a living from doing art, especially, I would say even in the West, especially in London or in England, because a lot of the best in the world will come here. Designers, artists, concept artists, advertising, whatever, they come here. So there's a lot of competition.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a tough business. In Nigeria, even harder, I would imagine, because there isn't the outlet for it.
Yeah. How did you kind of end up, working for some of these really well-known titles then?
Yeah, I think I was telling you this before we started. I didn't want to. Well, let's go back to the beginning. I remember when I was studying graphic design. That's what I studied actually, studying graphic design, and I was telling people I wanted to be an artist for 2000 AD. I've been reading 2000 AD since I was a kid. I was in Nigeria at this time, and when I go back to England, that's what I'm gonna do. That's my dream. Because came back to England, I got my first job as an advertising concept artist. I got bored because my skills weren't being used, and I got a little bit depressed. And I got made redundant because the company had problems. And when I got made redundant, I remembered, have you forgotten about that dream you had to be an artist for 2000 AD? So I hunted down the editor of 2000 AD. His name is Alan Mackenzie. Alan Mackenzie, huge respect to you, man. I remember hunting him down, and I was telling him I was the biz. I am one of the hottest artists you'll ever meet. And I would hound the poor man. Because back then I had no shame. When you're young and you're hungry, you literally have no shame. I can't do that now. Right. But I would hunt the poor man, and he gave up. He just said, okay, come.
Just to stop you asking.
Yes. And so I came to Mr. Mackenzie's office, showed him my wonderful portfolio, and he said, "This is SHIT." I'm serious.
Wow.
He said it without flinching. I love the man. I love it when you tell me what you're thinking. He didn't waste my time with platitudes. Oh, it's so nice. It's beautiful. We will consider this sometime next year. No, he just said, "This is whatever." And he said, "I'm going to show you what professional comic book art looks like." Took me around the corner, opened up a drawer, and brought out this magnificent, luxurious piece of art. And I looked at it and I understood. Illustration for reproductive printing is not the same as fine art. As soon as I saw it, I understood.
Right.
Went back home. They said, "Come back in 6 months and let's see your work." Came back in 6 months. He said, "Well done. A lot better."
Wow.
Now, usually we work 8 months ahead of schedule. So right now we don't have anything for you, but we will call you. True to his word. Guess what happened? Before I got home, David Bishop, who is a new editor on staff, calls me and says, "We've got a job for you." This is before I get home.
Amazing.
Well, this is the story. So I leave. Alan Mackenzie's looking at my work. And then David Bishop is in a small room, new editor for the 2018 new magazine title. This is a mega city title. He's in the next little room, like a little box room. He says, "David, come here, come take a look at this. You might be interested." David says, "Yeah, I'll have him."
Wow.
That's how I got into 2000 AD.
Wow.
Just for those who don't live in this world, Siku, what kind of characters have 2000 AD produced? And maybe like give us some of the, the inside baseball on Marvel versus, DC and all of that stuff.
So it's a very different mindset. You have a European sort of like taste of what comic books are like, especially the French and the Belgians. When they think of comic books, they think album. They don't think
Tintin.
Yes.
Asterix.
Yes.
That kind of
they
thing.
don't think of a flimsy 32-page book with advertising inside.
Okay.
Right.
So they're thinking art. When the Americans are thinking about comic books, they're thinking about the American way. This is what American way means. It means good wins over evil all the time.
Right.
In the end, we will win. Right? It's very optimistic.
Okay.
Only American culture, which by the way is a Puritan culture. Any born and bred American is a Puritan. That's why Superman is a Puritan. Essentially, that's what he is. Only America could give us Superman. Nobody else could. It's impossible. Right? Now, the Japanese have a very completely different way of thinking also. All Japanese comic books, in fact, literature is apocalypse. All manga, all modern Japanese art is apocalypse.
This might come under the banner of anime, that kind
All
of
anime,
art,
all
yeah.
manga is apocalypse.
Right.
Even if it's cutesy animation.
Even if it's Pokemon.
Yes.
Okay.
It's all apocalypse.
Okay.
The British are spoilers. We are irreverent.
Okay.
We are disruptors. And so there's no consistent style. When you look at British comic book, there is no consistent style. Unlike if you saw European comic book, you'd know that's a European culture. You can see the legacy of art training. With British comic books, it's neither here nor there. Right. We're mixing everything. And so you have Judge Dredd, who's an American, that's a 2080 character, very, very ironic. In your face violence, in your face jokes, but very ironic at the same time. Yeah. It's like we show you this, but we mean that. And the British do that a lot. You can see that with Doctor Who, for example. Doctor Who is a very tongue-in-cheek reference to stuff, but it's like, it's this, but it's that. The British do that a lot.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I guess, and a lot of it, I guess, is about the culture it comes out of and everything else. Was there a kind of specific style that you were attracted to, having sort of seen all of these types of different comic books?
I'm not a fan of the American style. American style is more turnkey. So when I say turnkey, just think of Ford, the invention of the of mass manufacture.
Right.
So you have the Ford factory, and then just imagine that iteration copied into McDonald's. Where you have the replication of the technique. So every burger looks exactly the same. You have the same thing with American comic books. All look the same. It's like they're all drawn by the same people because they have a certain process and a school of thought, and they want to replicate it. Europeans are more arty. The British, like I said before, it's a mix of all sorts of styles. They're really chaotic. And I remember growing up, especially when I was in art school, the artist that impressed me the most would have been Simon Bisley. Simon Bisley is a nutter. He
As all best people are.
he is a force of nature, and I don't even think he knows what he's doing when he's doing it. I think it's totally out of his head when he's doing it. But when you see what he does, when you see it, you know this is animal. There's no cultivation there. And unlike most artists, and even I, when I'm drawing, there's a lot of cultivation, there's a lot of self-censorship going on. When you look at Simon Bisley's work, it's a force of nature. You can't duplicate it. And that really inspired me.
Yeah.
But having said that, my favorite artist of all time, it's not Michelangelo, it's not Leonardo da Vinci, it's actually Mobius, the French artist.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my,
There you go.
that's the great, I think he's a superb, supreme genius. And this is what I like about Mobius. He can be anything. Mobius can be a painterly, he can be a watercolor guy. He could do westerns better than any American. And then he can do science fiction.
Wow.
He can do anime.
Yeah.
The guy is a genius, supreme.
Yeah.
So I've got
Wow.
these two characters
Yeah.
on either end of the spectrum, the force of nature and the cultivated artist.
Yeah, amazing. Can I ask a question? And
Yeah.
I know very little about the way that comic books are made. So apologies if during the course of this interview I ask a silly question. But you talk about the characters and the way that different cultures have different ways of telling stories, and actually even the different types of stories they're interested in telling in the first place. So really simplistically, and I apologise for how silly this is going to be, literally what comes first? Does someone draw a character and then from there they create story? Or is there a story and then that's given to artists and it's like, now can you draw these characters?
Yes.
Or is it like
So it all
two in the
depends.
same?
It all depends if it's an established character. So if you already have an IP that's been running for 20, 30 years,
Of course,
there
yeah.
you'll have all the specs on what the lead characters look like,
Yes.
and then you simply just work off from that.
Yes.
If you've got a new character that's never been designed before, then you do design the character first. But having said that, the way we work in Britain and the States is very different. Like I said, the Americans have a turnkey method. But even putting that aside, there's a Marvel way. I don't know if you've heard of the Marvel way.
Tell us.
The Marvel way is a unique way of doing art, which was invented by Stan Lee. Stan Lee, another brilliant man, by the way. It's a way of churning the thing out really quickly.
Okay.
So Americans are very good at this. For most parts of the world, it might take an artist 2 years to churn something out very slow because it's art. It's very slow. It's like,
Sure.
oh, I'm getting inspired. Yeah, forget that. Americans are business-like. It's about pay me the money. And if you've met any American, it's about the green.
With apologies to our American listeners, but he's telling it like it is. Okay.
I have a production company in the States where I co-run one, and I've got 3 American partners, and I am teasing them all the time. I am not sorry. So what they do is, I'm making you laugh, good. So what they do is this: they will write a synopsis, very, very short synopsis, and the artist will decompress that synopsis across the 32 pages, hand it over to the writer. The writer will write the dialogue into the 32 pages. So while he's doing that, he's painting.
see.
Okay.
Bang, 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 bang. Get the thing out there next month, next issue.
Wow.
That's how the Americans do it.
That's so interesting to hear that's the way around it goes. Well, you.
But, by the way, it's an old technique, so they're
Yeah.
not doing that so much now. Not so much now.
Well, things move on, I suppose.
Yeah, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that was
the method.
That was the method
That was the method.
for Marvel, and a lot of people would have copied that.
We'll come in a minute to the way this has found, a new life in things like the Manga Bible in your work. But where did faith come into all this? And did your, the Christians in your life approve of, this desire you had to go and draw comics?
Fantastic story.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yes. So 11 years old, I became a believer at the age of 11. So I kept drawing the demons I was drawing before.
The monsters.
Yeah, the monsters and creatures from the deep and gargoyles and this fantastic stuff. So I kept drawing that. And the believers around me thought that this was unhealthy, it was unspiritual, it was even demonic. Why are you doing these things? And of course, I faced this all my life. And there's certain irony to this. They might criticize my art as demonic, but when they needed posters for Sunday school or for church, they'll come to me. Can you do some painting for us?
Sure,
And
yeah.
I would think, so my art is worthy enough to grace the church when you guys need to publicize something, but when I'm drawing for myself, it's demonic. So that was the thing I was going against growing up. And by the time I was 18, paying for myself, going through art school, doing radio jingles here and there. And I'll do some artwork, sometimes for Christian organizations, churches, and they wouldn't want to pay me. And I began to understand the reason why they wouldn't want to pay me was because they didn't understand or even give any value to the art. The art was a function of the ministry. It wasn't the main thing. We could do it without it, and it had no intrinsic meaning.
It was just a means to an end.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why in Christianity we don't do natural theology. Thank you, John Calvin, for that, by the way. We think there's no value in it. Again, I think but by the time I'm 20, I'm saying I am never going to work for the church. And if I did, it would be a gift.
Right.
As an offering, I wouldn't get any payment for it. That way, if I get disrespected or whatever, it wouldn't matter. So one day at church, my late 20s, one of my old friends, he's not a thus saith the Lord type guy. This day, he became that. He came to me and just said, the Lord told me something this morning when I was coming to church. He said, tell, this guy, never assume that your art isn't for me. Never assume I can't use your art. And then he just turned around and walked away. I want to have a dialogue with you about what does that mean? He just walked away. There's no discussion here. That's when I changed my mind. I did a 360-degree turn. Although when you do that, you go back to where you were before. So I did a 180-degree turn away from where I was, which was my art is my art, and my service to God is my service to God. That is, I'll sing in church. I'll lead youth group in church. I'll do all that stuff. But the art, 2080, by that time, hardcore. My brother and I, we did some work in 2080 that even our editor, David Bishop, who is an unbeliever, had to, what's the word? Edit.
Right. Okay.
It was grotesque.
Right.
So we pushed boundaries. And people would always ask you, as a Christian, how can you do things like this? And I would ask, have you read the Bible? So that's how I did my 180-degree turn, was that day. I now had to reorient myself, retrain my mind, as in, so God does take my art seriously. He takes it seriously enough to tell someone to tell me.
Yeah.
So I changed my view. I was a Calvinist. In fact, a lot of my the core of my Christian belief actually springs from Calvinism. And the Calvinist approach is that art is a shadow and a reflection, but it's a poor shadow and reflection. Therefore, you can ignore it because the real is here. So if the real is there, why are you looking at this shadow? That's how John Calvin understood it. That's how I understood it.
Right.
So this guy coming to me now makes me think, God is taking my art seriously. And that's how I changed my mind.
Wow.
About 90% of what I do now is for the church, for Christ.
Amazing. And one example
Yeah.
we have sat right in front of us.
The Manga
Yes.
Bible.
The Manga Bible.
Yes.
Now, before you tell us about that project in particular and how you've put the words manga and Bible together, for a novice such as myself, what is manga? Because you've kind of hinted towards the fact that it's quite a specific comic art. Tell me what it is.
So for the Japanese, manga just simply means, in modern terms, because there's an old manga sense, in the Japanese sense, there's an old manga, and then there is a post-1945 manga.
Okay.
So for the Japanese, manga just means comic book.
Okay.
In the West, when we think manga, we're thinking about Japanese and comic books. Of course, you have Korean comic books called manhwa, which is a copy of Japanese, and you have Chinese comic books, which is a reflection of the Japanese. But of course, the Japanese has a central sort of like core to it, which is post-apocalypse. I talked about this before, 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you have what they call red cover books. These were the mangas that came off that. Very cheap to produce. That's why manga till today is black and white.
Okay.
It's not because there isn't tech. It's not because it can't be done cheaply. It's because of the legacy of manga, which is black and white, cheaply done, easily done on pulp, and just send it out. People just buy this. And the entire narrative of manga, especially the most famous ones, like Akira, for example, is always about urban annihilation.
Yeah. Well, I was very much sort of a teenager when I discovered Akira, and that was like, I really got into it. I started to like create my own Akira reproductions on my, at that point, basic art program on my computer and that kind of thing. And there was just something about manga that I just really resonated with. I like the style, the look, the kind of glamour of it. But it was quite dark in many ways. It's a very sort of, it isn't like that super hat man, good always triumphs. It's kind of like, it's quite twisted. And, and Akira itself is this story of a kind of post-apocalyptic Tokyo with, all of this kind of intrigue and awful things happening. So it's kind of, what I can understand why, when you were growing up and people were like, is this the right thing? And then you put it in a Bible. But it's interesting you say, well, the kind of grotesque kind of boundary pushing stuff I was doing, it kind of lives in the Bible anyway.
Oh, yes.
So tell us about the Manga Bible itself.
Oh, yes. The Manga Bible was, our approach was to take the manga storytelling sort of technique. It's minimalist and it's more about visuals. And the Japanese are very good at doing kinetic imagery. If you're watching a Japanese action movie, you can see how adept they are at choreography, unlike the West. The West are very good at talking heads. That all comes from Victorian talking heads on the funny pages, where you have two people talking, and then you transfer to cinema. The West are very good at that, but the Japanese are so good at action because they always think in terms of movement. I wanted to transfer that and bring that into the comic book, into religious comic books. What we had before was a religious Sunday school tone to it. Abraham, the father of the Hebrews, Joshua, and how he conquered the Canaan. And I wanted to bring a seamless tone from beginning to end. You could read the Manga Bible from beginning to end, and it's one story, and it's one voice. And it was not a Sunday school sort of take on scripture, but rather it was about the story. So story was king. And that's how we understood what stories to tell, because the tone would dictate what the story was going to be. So that was the essence of it. Unfortunately, we couldn't be minimalist with words because it was the Bible, of course.
Notoriously not minimalist.
Yes. Notoriously not minimalist. And we didn't have the space to let it breathe. But by the way, there's a big story behind the Manga Bible, which I will tell you. We did that in 3 months, by the way.
3 months?
Yes,
Wow.
and I'll tell you the reason why later when that pops up.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll come back to that.
I am just popping in to invite you to be a part of our Seen and Unseen community. You can have Seen and Unseen sent straight to your inbox. On Tuesdays, our editors give a weekly roundup of things that have caught their eye in culture, current affairs, trends, all of it. On Fridays, you will have the best of Seen and Unseen articles delivered directly to your inbox. And you will also be first to know about any events that we have coming up. So head to seenandunseen.com to subscribe.
I mean, I love the fact that you felt that call to kind of actually know I could do something directly, if you like, Christian and for God in that art and so on. I do sometimes feel like we have created this dichotomy, haven't we, where, it's either art in the secular world or art. And sadly, I think often today, Christian art, music, literature, in that genre, if you like, is a kind of a sad copy of what's being done better in the secular world. And it feels like that's not always been the case. If you go back a few centuries, there wasn't this dichotomy between secular and sacred art. It was just like the church and Christianity and Christendom produced the best art because it was building the cathedrals and, funding the Michelangelos and everything else. So I don't know, can we... Is that era just gone? Do we just, or is there a way of kind of fueling good art through Christian faith again?
So I think it's about changing our posture, how we view stuff, how we view life, how I view this table, and how we're sitting down on the floor. It's about how you take in all that information. The fathers, the church fathers, were in love with Plato. They were besotted with Plato. But of course, with Plato, you have the upstairs and the downstairs, the essentials, which are upstairs, and then the non-essentials, which are downstairs. You have the profane downstairs, and then you have upstairs, you have the beautiful. And for him, that which is downstairs, the material world, is not really real. It's profane. It's vulgar. But that which is upstairs, which is very simple, it is, in its simplicity, there's beauty. That's where truth is. And so the church fathers who were besotted with Plato loved him and would say, look, this guy could even have been a believer. He's so virtuous, and his writing so virtuous. It was as though they modeled their theology on Plato, not on Jerusalem. So this is a big problem. Later, about 1,000 years later, as we hit what's it called now? As we hit Enlightenment and modernism and the evangelical movement, everything now drifts towards the things that you can see, empiricism and making arguments through a logical gymnastics. So that if you can't really quantify it, then it doesn't really exist. Returning back to re-enchantment simply means that we no longer view the things of the material world as though they are profane, but that they are part of God's world. They are part of mystery. And in fact, it gives language to that which there is no language. So in the upstairs, if there is no language in the stuff that's in the upstairs, that's the sublime. Sublime finds expression in what Plato would have called the profane. That's where there is language. There's no language upstairs because everything is done in a syllable. It's that simple and it's that beautiful that you can't contextualize or nor describe it. However, the way you get to do that is what's upstairs is propagated downstairs. Downstairs, which is where you have the slimy stuff, the sweating and the heat and the saliva, but that's where you get meaning. Sometimes a lot of the meaning is coming through pain and through suffering, but all of that pain and suffering and joy and beauty, birth, rebirth, death, are ways of expressing the stuff that's upstairs. So I think when we reorient how we think about how we take in information, we call it epistemological sort of reality or an ontology sort of thing, if we can change how we think about that stuff so that the things that we see, and by the way, this is a return back home. And maybe it's not a bad thing that when the church went Greek, it left Jerusalem and went to Athens. Like a child leaves home, leaves their home village, travel around the world. At some point, the child needs to come back home. These are the things I learned when I went on my travels. So the church went Greek, went to Athens, went all over the world. We conquered the world. We created modernity. And it's like, time for you to come back home. So we go back to Jerusalem. And when we come back to Jerusalem, we will find meaning that eating food in itself is an act of spirituality. Hugging an old friend is an act of spirituality. It's not just something human beings do. It's something that transcends the realities so that what we do here has an imprint on what happens up there. It's not just a one-way traffic where what happens up there has a footprint down here. What happens down here finds an imprint or footprint up there. So this is what I think the new theology is. So you listen to someone like Jonathan Peugeot, for example, or even his brother, Matthew
former guest
Peugeot.
on the show, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or even his brother wrote a wonderful book on Genesis. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a bit of a difficult read, but it's one of the greatest books on Genesis that I have seen.
Right.
Because he's going at Genesis from a motif and pattern in perspective. If you don't understand that the Bible itself is based on patterning and motif, imagery, because we're Greeks, when we think about imagery, we think it's an analogy. But analogies are like a candle. You light the candle, it lasts for a very short period of time. And in fact, if you take an analogy and you stretch it beyond its purpose, it breaks. You have contradictions. That's what analogy does. Motif, on the other hand, or pattern, on the other hand, is you can replicate it. Not only can you replicate it, you can take other motifs and other patternings and join them together to create a new motif and a new patterning. Patterning and motifs are forever. Analogies are only for a moment. But because we are Greek, we are Hegel, we are Aristotle, we are Plato, we think of the sayings of Jesus as analogy. So when Jesus uses the example of an evil king, and this maiden comes and she makes a petition and he doesn't want to listen to her, but she makes noise day and night, and finally he says, oh, you get the girl in here. But he's using an evil king as a type of for God. We think analogy, but when you think patterning and motif, then you see there's a deeper meaning in there. So we need to change course in how we do theology in the West. It's a Western problem, by the way.
I feel like with you, Siku, and this, I feel like we need like a hot take button. Do you know what I mean? Just to be like, yeah, another one. You're also touching on some like Ian McGilchrist, Rowan Williams stuff there. This idea of like the relationship between the seen and the unseen things. But what you just made me think of there was kind of challenging to me as someone who doesn't know a huge amount about the superhero world. I would have assumed that what you said earlier is the more American model of good always triumphs over evil. Just always the same. I think what I would have thought is, well, that's obviously like the most quote unquote Christian type of comic storytelling then. But actually, is that me falling victim to this whole... Actually, has that been stretched too far? And actually, it doesn't create space for complexities and for pattern in perhaps ways that other types of maybe manga, I don't know, do.
So the way I would put this is the sum of human experience is the story. So almost like you break up the human experience, break them up into families. This is what the American families experience is like. And that experience forces them to express themselves this way.
Okay.
So I think the easiest way to explain this is in terms of culture. What is culture? Culture is basically problem solving. It solves the simplest problems. Let me give an example of the simplest problem. You wake up one morning and you leave your bedroom, or you leave your house, your neighbor is across the road, and you see him for the first time. She sees you for the first time. What do? That's a problem. And so you invent something. Okay, do I bow my head? Do I do this? Do I say hello? Any set of number of solutions to that particular problem. But once the first person does it and everybody agrees, that's not a bad solution. That's culture.
That's culture making.
That's one. Two, the other problem is culture solves the problem of who am I? What am I? Why am I? Where am I going? And so when Americans write their stories, that's the problem they're solving. Who are we? What are we? Why are we? Where are we going? When the Japanese do it, it's the same thing. When the Brits do it. I don't know about that one. I'm just joking.
They're the outlier.
Yes,
who don't know what they're doing.
They're the cool. The weird thing of the Brits is they're the cool kid in the party who stands on the wall while everyone's dancing and they're laughing at everybody. Ha ha.
Laughing at everyone, but secretly taking their dance moves.
There you
I'll
go.
use
Exactly.
that.
So that's what story is. It's about defining yourself in the space.
But when
so they're all good.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all good.
Yeah, okay.
So when we see a story, represented in a superhero comic, say it's Batman or Superman. I mean, as we said at the beginning, you were saying it goes back a long way, the superhero genre, if you like. It's not something we've just invented. What's going on there for you? Why do we tell stories in lots of different cultures about superheroes, but the superheroes can be quite different? Superman is quite different to Batman. What's going on there? And I mean, is it too simple to say, oh, they all just point back to Jesus in some way?
I always say that my wife, my family, that they laugh at me when I say, oh, that's Jesus over there. Oh, you see that? That's Jesus over there. It's like, Jesus is everything. But I guess Jesus kind of like, he just swallows up everything. So anything that has meaning is about him. So let me put it in a different way. Because you could ask the most absurd question like, well, if everything is Jesus, then what about pornography? I say, yes, that too is Jesus. It's like, how do you explain it? So we go back to that Platonic model. Oh, there's not really Plato. Plato just says the downstairs is irrelevant. The Hebrew model says both is relevant. So if we use the Hebrew model of the upstairs, downstairs, the sublime, the profane. So we're downstairs and we're looking up at heaven. Heaven is where all stories come from. Or if you're telling it as a prophet, you do your hands like this, then you're telling stories of redemption. But if you do this,
What are you doing for the sake of our audio listeners?
when you put your fist at God,
Yeah.
you're telling stories of destruction.
Right.
But it's all about God. It's all about Jesus. It's either I love you, Jesus, or I hate you, Jesus.
And pornography is the I hate you.
Pornography is I hate
Yeah.
you, Jesus, and I hate myself too.
Right. It's so interesting. So you wrote a book called literally Batman is Jesus, which sounds a bit heretical on the surface of it. But what were you trying to say there? Because that's a book all about superhero motifs and things.
So we say in terms of the superhero genre, we say the archetype of archetypes. And by the way, that's what Jesus. When Jesus is described as King of Kings, literally what it means is the archetype of archetypes. So when we look at the superhero of superheroes, it has to be Superman. He's the most pristine example of a superhero. And that's not by accident that the Americans could do that. Nobody else could in history.
Is that because he's like the best at everything, basically? He's got all of the superpowers in one kind of thing.
Okay.
I opened up a can of worms here, I can tell.
Okay, that's okay, it's a good answer, but it's probably simplistic. Okay, so the American journey is a hard journey. Yeah. It's a very difficult journey, and at some point in time, it could have died in its infancy, and then some Indians came over and saved the day. So it's a very, very difficult journey. And you add on top of that the Civil War. You have slavery, which is a stain which has scarred America, the scar which remains till today. Yeah. So it's the entire experience, the American experience distilled. That's what Superman is. And only the American experience could have produced that. The American experience is birthed in optimism. Come over here, free land. Come over here, freedom from kings and queens and tyrants. That experience is unique.
Yeah.
On the other hand, when you have something like Superman, supremely successful, and then you have other copies, like the Phantom, for example, some other hero that's like him but can't do quite as well because it's only a reflection of Superman. The only way to answer that is to do something that's an inversion of Superman. That's what Batman is. I think Batman comes out about a year later.
It's like his shadow self.
It's a shadow self. So you have the upstairs and you have downstairs. Now, what is that in terms of our king, our God? Well, we have here the Son of Man. But the Son of God upstairs, Son of Man downstairs. Son of David upstairs, the all-conquering king, right? That wild ox who would destroy the enemy with his horn. Downstairs, the sheep that doesn't answer back, but is stricken. And so what you have is upstairs is Superman, all-conquering. Downstairs, Batman, the suffering hero. Is it by accident that a culture can produce inversions that kind of paint a picture of not just the human experience, but of salvation history? That is no mistake. The only reason why actually I can say that is no mistake is that in him we live, and we have our being. That is everything we do is an imitation of Christ or some sort of expression of that salvation plan.
Just to explain, this would be really helpful, I think, for people who maybe, again, aren't comic book nerds, but will be asking, well, what is the difference between Superman and Batman? Like, Superman, I guess, is like he's your ultimate hero. He's kind of like, the guy, as I say, who can do everything, has all the superpowers. What's so different about Batman when you say he's the anti-hero kind of thing?
Batman is dysfunctional. Superman is functional.
Okay. Why is it the backstory of Batman?
Oh, yes.
What's it all about?
Oh, it's oh goodness me, it's so complex. I'll try and simplify as much as I can. Look, I usually would ask a question like, who's the most tragic superhero in a superhero universe? And people will struggle with it a little bit. And it's Batman, right? It's Batman. Okay. Now, so what's the worst thing that can happen to a superhero? Nobody can get that answer. Can you guys give me?
You've got to tell me.
the worst thing that can happen to a superhero is not losing the whole world. No, it's losing the girl
Okay.
every time. So when you think of,
Yeah, that's true.
and by the way, we're wondering, well, why are all the superheroes men? We'll hit that one. Okay, so
Okay, we'll hit that one
yeah,
next.
we'll hit that
It's
one
clocked.
if there's space. Okay, so so the other thing then is, gosh, I've just gone off track because there's so much in my head.
Yeah.
I'm rolling around. I've just lost track.
Batman. Bruce Wayne. He's a messed up guy.
Yep. So the other question
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the roll call of superheroes who are dysfunctional, James Bond, Bruce Banner, that's the Hulk. Bauer of the 24 series. Look at all these dysfunctional heroes. What do they all have in common? They lost a girl.
Right.
Every single one of them try to have a functional relationship with the love of their life and can't, and she has to leave them to survive. That's exactly what Bruce Wayne is. Unlike our boy from Kansas. See how he's from Kansas, by the way? Middle America, right? Okay. So unlike our boy from Kansas, who, by the way, came from a foreign land, and he flows through the streams of the cosmos like Moses on the streams of water.
Okay.
And so he hits Kansas like Moses hits the palace. And notice how he only has one girlfriend.
Yeah.
He had a college sweetheart, but as an adult, he has
Lois Lane all the way.
Lois Lane all the way. There's nothing else. On the other hand, you have the dysfunctional Batman, the lover of the whore. You have a lover of the princess on one side, the lover of the whore on the other side. What is Jesus? There is the Jesus who's the lover of the whore. That's the son of David. There's the son of man. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Let me say that again. There's the son of God. That's son of David, who is the lover of the princess. Downstairs, you have the son of man, who's a lover of the whore. That's us. Does that make sense?
It does.
We have no inheritance. It's Israel. That's Israel's inheritance. So he says, I have a new commandment for you today. What's that? That's a ketuvim. He's marrying somebody else. He came for her, the princess, and she says, get out of here. I don't want you. I paid a dowry for you. I don't want you. We had a marriage contract. When? In Sinai. You know that thing that you signed? That was a marriage contract, ketuvim. So I'm here to, let's consummate this thing. And they say, no. I'm going to go for the whore. That's us. Wow. That's Batman.
It's so interesting. I feel like there's about a million questions that raise themselves. We did promise we'd get back to that one about why the vast majority of superheroes male is.
Yes.
Do you have a theory on that one, Siku?
It's because they're made by men.
Okay. Might be fair.
That's fair enough, yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, so I'm gonna share a mystery with you. What genre do you think fairy tales are?
I guess they're almost their own genre, I would have thought.
Yeah, I would have assumed they were a
like,
genre in and of
fantasy, I
themselves.
suppose, is the wider genre, maybe? I don't know.
Who's the main hero of fairy tales?
Well, best traditionally, it's been the Prince Charming who's come to rescue the
leader, the protagonist
themselves.
is the princesses.
Okay.
The genre of fairy tale is actually end time. All fairy tales are end time genre. All fairy tales are end time genre.
Explain it.
You know who she is? The princess of the fairy tale.
Go on.
She's the church every time. Every time she's the church. Why is Prince Charming not with her, by the way? You guys know why? Because he went to his father's house to prepare a place for her. He's never supposed to be there. That's what the Song of Solomon is about. My lover, where are you? I ache for you. I want you. And at one moment, he's there. Right? He knocks on the door. Behold, I stand at the door of your heart and I knock. Let me in. He knocks on the door. She opens, but he's not there anymore. And she pines for him. She walks through the streets at night. The night watchmen, they catch her, they beat her up. But she says, I still want my lover. And then the maidens of Jerusalem say to her, this guy you keep talking about, so beautiful, so precious, can you show him to us? That's a fairy tale. That is one of the Shirot, one of the 10 songs of the Hebrew tradition. It's the last one, actually. Then the Messiah comes and he writes his. We're living his song right now. And here she says to him, this is the last verse of the Book of Solomon. He says to him, hurry to me like a gazelle so we can meet at the Mount of Spices. That's the temple, New Jerusalem. What does he say in response? It's not in the Book of Solomon, it's in Revelation. I come quickly. Fairy tales is the story of the church. That's where she comes into her fore. So a lot of the superhero stories we're telling is about Jesus, the gallant warrior, valiant and in victory, and yada, 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 and shining and lights and beams and stuff. When we tell fairy tale stories, it's about her.
That's interesting.
But we don't know that yet because we've not had the people of God say it yet.
Yet. This is where we need that hot take button.
Yeah.
I can just picture, though, that there will be people who work in the comic book industry who say, I'm not Christian. Oh, no, I'm not telling the story of Jesus, thank you.
You can't help it.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of what I want you to tease out. Why can't... Are you saying that they can't help it because that's what's been passed down? It's a legacy from where superhero stories started and this type of storytelling kind of thing started? Or is it... Are you saying that, no, this is like literally within you is the capacity to tell this story? It's more of a soul thing.
Do you remember that Michael Jackson song? I can't help it if I wanted to. I wouldn't help it even if I could.
You'd just sing that in response.
Yeah, that's it. Good answer.
I couldn't help it, no. That's the short answer to that. You couldn't help it if you wanted to. And even in your protestations, thou dost protest too much. The fact that you protest in itself is validation.
Even the stories where we kind of deliberately take a different slant, it's only makes sense because it's going against the grain of the
So there's something I say to people about writing, and they say writers should write about things they know. I say, actually, if you're a writer, you can't help it. You will write about things you don't know. You have no choice. There's another thing I say. If you're a writer, you can't lie even when you try. So even when you're trying to be subversive and to be destructive and you hate humanity, you're a nihilist, and you're going to be writing about him. Is the fist or is the open hand?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess you obviously take a very deep view of what you're doing through your art, and that you're tapping into something that's kind of been there patterned for us in all kinds of ways. Do you feel like then Christians need to be quote unquote Christian in their art, or do they just need to do good art, I suppose, because it's kind of, it will come out in one way or the other, either the fist against God or the superhero who looks like God in the end?
When you do propaganda, what tends to happen, it tends to water down the essence of the art. You can see that now with the messaging in new art, like from Disney, for example, its movies, Pixar's movies. A lot of them are bombing at the moment. They're bombing because the audience they get this feeling that they're being propagandized.
Preached to.
Yeah, they're being preached at, talked down to. And I think this is the trap the church fell into. Once you take your eye off the ball, that's to say that if I do art, it's an act of worship in itself. Once you go away from that and art now becomes a function, it becomes a logistical reality. If I do this, I get that. Almost transactional. Once you do that, then you fall into the propaganda game. Of course, when you do propaganda, you're not doing art anymore. You're doing messaging. And that's what we've been doing for who knows how long. It's difficult to make the shift. A lot of the shift needs to be made by pastors, teachers, leaders, mentors. A lot of those who are doing that at the moment are gatekeepers. And so when you try to change the paradigm, because they've made a success of the old model, they don't want to change it. Even if they want to change it, can't change it. So you almost need something to happen. And it's amazing, really. One of the reasons why I'm doing this, when narcissism comes to church, a lot of reasons why we have failure at leadership today is because the model in itself encourages narcissism and sociopathy. And especially if you've become successful using a particular or exploiting a particular platform, it becomes even more difficult to get people to change. what we're having right now, the period that we're in, with leaders falling all over the place, left, right, and center, mega churches having all these big issues, I think God is doing a churning. So that if you don't want to change by being obedient, by my force of will, my zeal, I will force a change. And I think that's going to happen eventually. You'll find that, like I said this to you when we were out there on the balcony. I said, we have hit a wall. I think theologically, we've hit a wall. We're not as creative as we used to be. And in the arts, we've hit a wall too. And I think by hitting this wall, it will force a kind of response. Maybe it's one of repentance. Maybe we have to be more ingenious about the way how we do things. Maybe we start to listen to those outliers, people who say things like Batman is Jesus, and we scoffed at them last year. Maybe 10 years later, we're saying, can you say that again?
Who was that theological genius who said Batman is Jesus? I guess for me, like coming back to the theme of Re-Enchanting, something you said earlier sort of rang very true for me, and lots of the guests we have on here, is that we need to go back to Jerusalem. We need to go back to the story, and not necessarily the pulling it all apart logically, sort of philosophical world.
Atomized reading.
And I feel like that's exactly what you do with art, with your art. You are, absolutely a storyteller. And I get the feeling that people need to hear the story again. They don't need to hear necessarily 5 proofs for the existence of God, or
which you would never remember, by the way.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing. But it's a sort of, because the stories, like you say, they go very much deeper than that, don't they?
And they remain latent, by the way.
Yeah.
In your, not just, so because when you're raised in story, with your mom. I remember when my mom taught me how to dance, for example. I remember the 2-step thing she did, and it's remained in my fiber, the fiber of my beings. It's there, and I think one of the things about what story does is it reaches out to the latent sort of like ingredients that you've amassed through growing up. It reaches there and just gives definition, so that in its latency, it's effective. Like you said, it's not the 5 steps of that or 5 points of that. It's just meaning. So you give meaning to things that shouldn't have any meaning, the microphone and the metal and the paint, things that you would have thought shouldn't have meaning suddenly has meaning. That's what story does.
And when you tell a story, whether it be 2000 AD or the Manga Bible, I guess what's your hope? What are you trying to do? If it's not propaganda, as you said, what are you hoping the response is going to be of the person engaging that story?
Expansive reading. So let's be expansive in how we read scripture. And when I say expansive, that means take it more seriously. Okay, so when you're doing atomized study, you're in the jungle and you're studying a microscopic sort of like view of the bark of a tree. So you don't understand what the forest is, but you understand that microbe intimately. But there's no meaning in that. So I'm saying that venture isn't without profit. Of course, do that. But at the same time, take what you've learned as this Greek who left Jerusalem on your travels. Take what you've learned and then pull back. See the forest and listen to the birds singing. That's where there's meaning. And that's what I'm trying to do with these books all over the place, which is withdraw from the very close reading which you've engaged culturally. By the way, again, I say, not a bad thing, but pull away so that you can actually understand the meaning of what's been said. That's my mission, basically.
That's beautiful.
Thank
Siku,
you.
I have learnt so much from you. I need to learn that whenever I go into one of these episodes, knowing the least about the subject, it will always be my favourite. And this is one of those things where I just forget.
Thank you.
I forget that I'm doing anything other than listening to you.
Thank you.
And all your hot takes.
Yeah, it has been fascinating.
Yeah, it's been so great.
I've learned more about comic books and the deeper meanings behind them than I have in the whole of my life. So it's brilliant. Thank you very much for all you're doing, Siku. Do go and get the Manga Bible, recently re-released, and
So the hour is up.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, the hour is gone.
Hours?
That's it. We're over an hour.
It's never
already.
long enough.
Never long
Ever.
enough. I know. But
Fantastic.
it's been so good to catch up with you,
Thank
Siku.
you.
We'll make sure there's a link, obviously, to where people can find out more about you, the Manga Bible, and your other work as well. But thank you for being our guest and re-enchanting superheroes, comic books, and everything else today.
Yes.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for watching, for listening as well. If you want more from Re-Enchanting, seenandunseen.com is the place to go. You can find videos, podcasts, and more from there.
Indeed. And we just want to thank you, as ever, for making this conversation and all conversations possible. If you want to be one of the people who helps us to make more of these episodes, then you can find all the information you need at seenandunseen.com/give.
See you next time.